this sacred conversation where we join together each week to have a conscious conversation. If you are joining us for the first time, you may want to hop into the Zoom room. You have an opportunity in the Zoom room to get up close and personal, to ask questions of our panelists, to discuss things back and forth. So please feel free to do that. And you can find the information for that on this event where you're viewing this live stream. So we come to you as your AGNT Leadership Council. I'm Reverend Erin McCabe. I serve at Unity Village Chapel, which is located on grounds at Unity headquarters at Unity Village, Missouri. And we come to you live each week to share a mindful message, share a spiritual practice, and help put the world today in spiritual context. So it is a delight to gather together. We are honored to get to have this time and space, and a shout out to everyone who always joins us every Wednesday in the Zoom room. It is so great to have you all here. It's good to see your names and it's good to have your faces. So with that being said, coming to us live from California, from Inner Light Ministries, is Reverend Deborah Johnson. Reverend Deborah, it's always a delight to have you. I love our conversations. And so what do you have for us today?
Well, greetings, everyone. What an extraordinary time in history this is. And I'm always so pleased to be here with my colleagues and with all of you as we just try to make sense out of the world that is around us, where we share with each other inspiration, practices, things that help us to stay inspired, that keep hope alive. And I always use the acronym of HOPE to keep our heart open, P for possibility consciousness, and E to stay engaged, keeping our heart open, staying in possibility, and being engaged. I've been doing a lot of sessions lately, particularly since the recent insurrection activities and all of the unrest and what appears to be tremendous amounts of social divides. And I've been doing a lot lately on not only inclusion, but on how do we stand in the oneness in the midst of all of this. One of the things that I noticed is that with this so-called divide, particularly the blue, the red, that there's a tremendous amount of othering going on. Othering is when you have this sense of there's us and them, that somehow or another there's this mutual exclusivity between us. There's a tendency to dehumanize, where they're not even like really people anymore. It's the this, the that, like the homeless, you know, those conservative, the liberals. And with that, we start to lose sight of each other's humanity. That was something that Martin Luther King Jr. used to always warn us about. He said that too often we trade in the I-thou relationship for an I-it relationship, where it's like we aren't even dealing with people anymore. And just one of the words of encouragement that I would like to give right now is that I think to really make it through these times, we have to develop an expanded consciousness that allows paradox to exist. Let me explain what I mean when I say that. A paradox is when there are seemingly opposite things that are both simultaneously true. And I know that gets to be a challenge sometimes on the spiritual journey. You know, people will say something like, well, be sure and get clear, you know, do your vision board. And then somebody else will say, well, don't have too much attachment, you know, surrender and let it go. And you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to really affirm specifically, or am I supposed to just be with anything? And the answer is E, like all of the above, and learning how to do the balance with that. Where I think it's so critical right now, and I'm going to speak specifically within the terms of the United States, although this is not something that is just particular to the United States, is this notion of who or what is the real face of America. So often I hear well, that's not who we are. That's not what we are. You know, Americans are this, or like Americans are that. And the answer is E. It's all of the above. Just like breathe that in for a moment. It's all of the above. The people who stormed the Capitol are just as American as the people inside of the Capitol, that we're all in this. And I think the moment that we can stop with this, who has the real ownership, who's the stepchild, get beyond the who can be in enough of a majority or a dominant position to be able to control, win out over the quote unquote other side, that if we're going to move forward in any kind of peace, and now that's really getting to be a question. If we can really move forward in any kind of peace, there has to be room in our heart for all of us. We say that we want that, we want inclusion, we say that we want liberty and justice for all, but all can't mean except for the people that we don't like. So what happens is that when we're judging the ones who we're judging, that's more judgment. When we're hating the ones who we're hating, that's more hate. That if we're going to honestly move forward with any kind of equity, justice, fairness, we have to be able to live in the paradox that it's all of it. That's our history from the beginning. From the beginning, the United States has lived a life of compromise where in order to have quote unquote unity, we have allowed simultaneous conflicting existences to occur simultaneously, perhaps best signified in slave state and free state. How can you have any more contradiction than that? And it's time now for us to not denounce, but to deal with the inherent contradictions, the paradoxes of them all, and find our way through. And I believe that we can.
That is huge, huge. I love that you always have a way of speaking to polarization and how we can move out of polarization and into oneness or into harmony, into wholeness, which doesn't always mean sameness. So, you know, that's what I really hear in this conversation. And you're right, because if you think about the world of religion, we do try to attain that. Religion is so diverse, and we are a country that is founded on religious freedom, and you know, giving people the opportunity to have a spiritual practice the way they want to worship the way they want to believe spiritually the way they want to. Yet when it comes to defining the United States, or what is the United States of America, what is our country supposed to represent, stand for, look like, we're doing what you said of going to like, well, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. And what if we could just take a deep breath and say, it's all of this, and it is as diverse as religion is diverse. And we know what happens when that attacks itself. You know, when that attacks itself, all the good comes out, and you're left with the destructive nature of a thought or an organization or an ideology.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, too much of religion has gotten caught up in the same thing, where yes, there's freedom, but the trap comes is when we combine freedom with supremacy. Then we have a problem where it's like, I'm free to practice my religion, not necessarily I'm going to support your freedom to practice your religion, but I'm free to practice mine. And part of my religion says your religion's bad and wrong. And part of my job is to make sure your religion doesn't flourish. And there's been too much of that, whether it's about religion, whether it's about race, whether it's about ethnicity, sexual orientation, whatever. There's been too much of that consciousness of mine's better. And we can't all be here with our own genuine selves. And that's part of what I love about this cosmology that we have in the New Thought movement. This cosmology that we have in the New Thought movement says that there is an underlying oneness that expresses itself in a multiplicity of diversity. And that's part of that paradox that we can hold it both. We can hold it all. Just like the cactus has an identity, the rose has an identity, but they're not different forms of life. They're the same form of life expressing in different ways. So we don't other. The people who are different from us aren't others. They are the same expressions of life that we are, just expressing themselves a little differently. And that perspective allows us to stay in that oneness regardless of how we are showing up in the world.
Right, right. And so that's a call to each one of us when we find ourselves defining other people or defining things through that which polarizes, that which starts pulling us apart. Can we look at it and look at the way we're interpreting, the way we're experiencing, the way we're labeling, and consider that there are other labels that we could choose. Consider that there are other parts of the wholeness that we could focus on if it is bringing us into polarization, so that we can heal this drive to separate and experience our calling to unite.
Exactly. We misunderstand the nature of conflict. Too many of us think that conflict arises out of differences, but that's not true. There's nothing inherent about differences that cause conflict. Conflict arises out of polarization around the differences. And I want people to just let that sink in for a moment. It's not the difference, it's the polarization around the difference. The conflict is the polarization.
Right.
That's the conflict. The moment that energetically I start to feel estranged, start to feel separate, start to feel like I'm getting in the othering, whether this is happening in my house, whether it's happening with the White House, it's like, it doesn't matter where it's happening. It's that energy that causes it. And part of our charge here in learning how to be together as a people in our most personal relationships, in our most social political relationships, is learning how to be civil, learning how to have differing opinions, dissension perhaps even, at the same time without going to war about it.
That's right.
One of the things that I really found amazing was Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Scalia, the two Supreme Court justices who were on the polar opposite of the spectrum in terms of their rulings. Obviously, Judge Ruth was very progressive and Scalia was quite conservative. But you know what? They were best buds. They were friends. They would go to the opera together and, celebrate things with their families together. We don't have to allow differences to tear us apart. That's a choice. And too often we spend our time trying to get you to change.
Right.
So that you're not different from me.
Right.
Rather than challenge my own self to not polarize from you because you're showing up differently.
Right. And I think that's one of the big keys. Like you said earlier on, you said, we treat this like whoever's the majority, that's the one who defines us. And I think that adds to the polarization and the conflict, because then it's either someone trying to convince someone or someone being afraid of being taken over by someone else's idea. So you've got either you all have to conform to my idea because it's the highest idea, or I'm feeling threatened the more I give space to your idea or your way of being or your definitions or your labels, because I don't want them in my life. And that really is just a recipe for destruction.
Exactly. You know, we here at Agent are in the middle of our season for nonviolence, where we are commemorating it in terms of its duration between the assassination dates of Gandhi and of King in April, King Jr. in April. And, you know, perhaps the most famous speech of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was his "I Have a Dream" speech. And the speech is really powerful. And I encourage everybody to really hear all of the speech, because we get stuck on one part of it. But that part of it that's most popular, when he speaks of this dream, he's talking about our capacity to do this very thing, to live in this seeming contradiction, to move beyond the polarization. And what I love about the speech is that he speaks of an intent, that his dream is an intent that one day the sons and the daughters of slaves and slave owners can in fact walk hand in hand together. Is that our intent today? Is it your intent? You know, whenever I'm doing King stuff and I post this to people, they're about to have a heart attack. When I'm talking to a progressive crowd and I say, is it your intent for your children and the alt-right children to walk hand in hand together? You know, is it your intent for the Holocaust survivors and the sons and daughters of the Holocaust survivors and the sons and daughters of the Nazis to walk hand in hand together? Like, ooh, you thought I said throw mama from the train or something. But right. It's like, if that's not your intent, what is your intent?
Well, and I think, Reverend Deborah, if you could help people in this question, like, how do people deal with the fear when they look at that intent, the fear of being overcome, influenced, taken over? Because that's what happens for people on, if you look at any side of it, you know. Okay, so if my child is connecting with someone that is really immersed in what I think is harming the planet or harming other races or whatever of that, I don't want to lose my child to that. You know, and people can think of their own psyche. You hear it all the time. Like, it's okay if people are the way they are, but just don't affect me.
Yes. Well, what happens with that analysis is that it's not assuming a responsibility for what we pass on as well. See, you know, there's this line in scripture about how the sins of the father are passed on to the children. And that word sin literally means to miss the mark. That sin is not so much about activity as it is about your relationship to the divine, that you have done something that's missed the mark of the truth of your being and who you are. You missed it because the only evil that we ever see is how, in fact, we treat each other. So the reason why I described it as intent is the infinite, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. Am I willing to be the first one to put out the olive branch? Am I willing to be the one to teach my children to stand in possibility? You know, how can we do this? And I know that it's possible. I'm living proof that it's possible. That my parents grew up in a segregated United States that was still segregated when I was born and throughout a good portion of my youth. And yet, look at what's happened in the progression. So I become one of that first integrated generations. And you know what now? When I do diversity training, if I'm talking to anybody under 30, particularly under 25, and I try to explain racial segregation to them, they look at me like I am crazy. They don't even have it's like, what? When I explained you couldn't even use the same water fountain or bathroom or go to the same school. And they're just kind of like, huh? Huh? Because intentionally, we have decided each generation to be better people. Here's the thing, and I want to give you this image. It's too easy for us to say, well, I don't want to do such and such a thing because of what they are or what they're doing. When you have a rift and you need to build a bridge across the rift, there's a way that a bridge gets built. A bridge gets built, not one side going to the other. A bridge gets built by anchoring on each side and working your way towards the middle.
Yes.
And it's a bridge when you hit the middle. But here's the catcher. What each side has to do might be very different, could be diametrically opposed. This side could be rock and you got to dynamite it. This side could be soft and you have to pour in cement. You anchor on your side of the bridge. Think about even in your personal relationships. You're worried, well, we need to talk about it. Somebody else needs space. Each of you needs to do what you need to do to anchor, and then you work your way towards the middle.
Yeah.
Do your part.
Yeah. And I think that's perfect. You know, the topic for today's Season for Nonviolence theme is groundedness. And what you're talking about is exactly that. When we are grounded in our own being, grounded one within our own being, and grounded two in our spiritual practice to go directly to source, then we do not need to get caught up in the fears of defending or worrying that we're going to lose ourselves to something else. That happens. Those fears come when one is not grounded. When one is not grounded, they can lose themselves. But when we are grounded, it's like you're talking about that bridge being built. When we're grounded, then we can be in the midst of even, you know, some of these expressions that feel like contradictions, and take the call of Martin Luther King to get into love, get into the harmonizing faculty, get into our connectedness, get into our humanity together, and start focusing less on the labels that divide us and more on the humanity that unites us. Yes. So thank you for this.
Thank you. If I could give one other analogy. So we've been for the past year now in this global pandemic of the coronavirus. And what happens with viruses, as we're seeing now, that viruses are communicable. So are thoughts. We're spewing them out there in the atmosphere, and we're collecting and picking up on each other's thoughts. So just as we have to have a strong physical immune system so that we're not susceptible to all of the viruses out there, so it is with our beingness. Part of that groundedness, it's like developing a spiritual immune system.
Right.
Spiritual immune system, so that your chi energy is strong and you can be in the midst of all of these other thought viruses out there, and you're not susceptible. You're not susceptible. So when you're afraid that somebody else's ideas are going to overpower you, you need to strengthen your immune system. You need to strengthen your immune system so that you're feeling less vulnerable, in addition to whatever that we're needing to do to try to limit the viruses. But make sure you're strong.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. And thank you for this message. Thank you. So everyone, if you are still watching live, you can go in and hop into the Zoom room if you'd like to. Let's have a clip from the Reverend.
You know
what it takes. People say, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. What they're really saying is, I don't know how to intervene in this and force my will upon it. When they're saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what action I can take so that I can get control of this and make it turn out the way that I want to make it turn out. The only thing you need to do is listen for the divine guidance. You will be directed in your next steps. Most of us don't want to take one step till we can see the next 10. It doesn't work that way. We're not allowed to see the future all the time. But we could see more if we were willing to accept what we see. I've gotten many messages basically saying, the reason why you don't appear to see more is because if you saw more, you would try to stop that. You try to hedge against that or get in front of it or like redirect it some kind of way. But if you're willing to be with it, you will be guided every step of the way. But it's just like the 12-step program, one day at a time. One day at a time. You may not get the whole big mosaic. One day at a time.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this week for AGNT Speaks. We'll be back next week. And if you want to learn more about AGNT and the Season for Nonviolence, you can go to agnt.today and find out more and also contribute to this great work that is co-creating a world that works for all. Blessings. All right, so we are in the Zoom room. Thank you for always a great conversation. And so often it's about stuff that I'm going through in my life and in my mind. So it's such a treat to get to be the one that hosts this, because it's just, you know, it's like little spiritual nuggets each week that nourish me. So I had an experience just the other day where I was called to exactly what you said. So so I'm taking that to heart. Thank you, my minister.
Good.
So everyone that's here, we see you. Thank you for being here. Does anyone have a question? If you do, you can just pop up in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand and you'll come right onto the screen. So feel free to do this. We just have a minute or two for a couple of questions. Mary Lou, thank you for sharing into our chat. You said this: my own bias insists that the other, conservative, is only interested in conquering. Thoughts on that?
Well,
And not bridge building.
Let me respond to it like this. That idea of wanting to conquer can be like the wolf in sheep's clothing. What I would say is that at this moment in time, the conservatives are quite upfront. They are pulling no bones or punches about their agenda and being quite upfront about it. But the reason why they're where they are is because they think they are reacting to a progressive agenda that just wants to take over and dominate. That's their perception, that they're not the ones trying to control, they're trying not to be controlled, is what it looks like in their mind. And I dare say that the progressives, for the most part, are articulating the same thing. It's just colored a little differently. But they also would be quite happy if their agenda, their politics, their value system sort of won out, so much so that it actually eclipsed the conservative. And I find it very interesting, having done conflict resolution as a profession for most of my life, no one ever starts the fight. No one ever feels like they threw the first punch. Everybody always feels like they're, even in one-on-one relationships, everybody always feels they're reacting to what the other one did, even if it's preemptive. You're about to do it. And I'm just always like this self-defense. So whereas we perceive it as direct offense, in the other people's minds, it's self-defense.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because, you know, I think about how we speak in New Thought, and yeah, we want this co-create a world that works for all. We want our agenda to become the majority or the dominant, you know, and that includes, I think, the basics of well-being for everyone, no matter where they are in their thoughts or their practices, or, you know, their mind, as far as what we might call, you know, progressive or not progressive. We want their well-being, right? Yeah. But we don't want the ideology to become the predominant energy, and at least this country, you know. It's an interesting idea, Mary Lou, that you bring up, because interested in conquering.
Yeah, that's where the problem comes. See, that it isn't, the problem isn't so much that you think you have the better mousetrap and you would like for everybody to have the better mousetrap. That's the stuff of a democracy. It's that build your case. And if you're all that, they will come to you. If you're all that, they will adopt whatever this is that you're thinking. It's the suppression that's the problem here. It's the...
And manipulation.
Yes, it's the preventing you from being able to do what you do to secure my position. I'm reminded now of a conversation I had during the marriage equality battles. I was in a debate with someone. Obviously, I was pro-marriage equality, and this person was against it. And I said, you know what? We both think that the other's wrong. I said, but here's the difference between us. I said, I will forever fight for your right to be in forums like this, to say that I'm wrong. I will fight for your right to say that I'm wrong. You just want to silence me. You just want me off of forums like this with no voice.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah. Wow. That's huge. That's huge. And you know what? I think that is one of the things that made so many of us so uncomfortable in this kind of climate that we're in right now, is that it seemed like before those kind of conservative and hateful, racist, all, fill in the blank, all that, voices were not the predominant ones. They were just the, louder ones. They're hard to hear. They're harsh, but, I think it brought fear up in a lot of us to see how pervasive it is, and to see how much of a majority that energy may have had. I heard a lot of people saying, how many of us said something about moving to Canada? Like, how many people, were like, to live under this other ideology. And then I think the lack of power, that feeling of not having the power, came from this idea that, like, okay, but is this really even happening to people? Are they being manipulated into this thought? Are they being fed news and ideas and, indoctrinated into this type of thinking that isn't even sometimes in their own best interest?
Right. It's
And
not,
that was terrifying.
it's not in their own best interest, and it's reactionary. And, to be quite honest, as an African American, what everybody is just waking up to is what we see all the time. Just like with the George Floyd killing, and people is, suddenly, oh my God, Black people are dying in the streets. At the hands of the cops. It's like, duh. This has been going on for decades. It's been going on for centuries. Yep. And what's catching up now, to me, is taking the blinders off.
Right.
I can go back to the beginning of the set, like sitting in the paradox of it all. This suddenly waking up, the cold shower that says we're not just this thing over here. Oh, we're also that. And how do I hold that? And even though it's shocking, it's necessary. If you want to go into recovery over something, you have to be able to hold it both. Like, right. Yes, I'm a good person, like, whatever. I have this job, I'm a mom, and I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And it's both. Now, let me do what I need to do to heal, but one doesn't erase the other.
Right. I just watched the film, The United States versus Billie Holiday. I had not seen it yet, and I just watched it the other night. And like what you're talking about, and even if you know this stuff, to see it put into film, and to how film and music just makes you feel things. It's just like, whew. But we have to be able to not just see it, but to feel it in order to heal it, and to move through, and to look at what is, and not have a shiny picture on this is what the United States is.
Yes. But there's a phrase that comes up in my spirit letters: feel, deal, and heal. And that's been getting a lot of traction. Actually, India RE in her last concert tour just put that, and I don't even know her, but you should put it clear across her stage with my name underneath it. And it's been on the Oprah show with Diana Van Zant and whatnot. And it's such a powerful concept. Feel, deal, heal.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone, for participating. It's so good to have you all here. Thank you for being a part of these conscious conversations. Let us all be grounded. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.